As more neighbors gathered, murmurs began to ripple through the crowd. Some recognized Marcus and stepped forward, trying to vouch for him. "That's Marcus. He's lived here for years," one man said, gesturing toward the end of the street. But the woman who had called the police wasn't backing down. She insisted she'd seen him acting suspiciously and kept pointing at him, her voice sharp and accusing. The officers, now caught between conflicting accounts, asked Marcus to wait while they clarified the situation. Marcus's dog, sensing his owner's unease, sat quietly by his side, tail wagging uncertainly. Marcus stood tall, but the frustration in his eyes was clear. He had done nothing wrong, yet here he was, treated as though he didn't belong in his own neighborhood. The tension was thick. Phones were out, recording every word in action. All eyes were on the officers, on Marcus, and on the woman whose accusations had sparked the scene. And then, just as the officers were about to make their next move, someone from the crowd stepped forward with undeniable proof that changed everything in an instant. The crowd froze as a young woman stepped forward, holding her phone tightly in her hand. She was visibly nervous but determined. "Excuse me, officers," she said, her voice steady despite the tension. "I think you need to see this." She played a video she had taken just moments before. It showed Marcus walking his dog, minding his own business, while the woman who called the police peered out of her window, clearly following him with her eyes. In the video, the woman could be heard muttering under her breath, "What's he doing here? He doesn't belong." The recording painted a very different picture from the one she described to the police. The officers exchanged a glance, their expression shifting as they processed this new evidence. But just as it seemed the situation might calm down, the woman on the porch snapped. "That video doesn't prove anything. He's been acting strange for weeks." Her voice grew louder, angrier, and she began accusing Marcus of things that didn't even make sense. The crowd, now fully engaged, started murmuring louder, some siding with Marcus and others looking uncertain. Before anyone could respond, another neighbor stepped forward, holding his own phone. "I've got footage too," he announced. This video, taken from a home security camera, not only showed Marcus walking peacefully, but also captured the woman yelling at delivery drivers and other neighbors in the past. It became clear that Marcus wasn't the first person she had singled out, but he might be the one to expose her behavior for good. The tension soared as everyone realized this was bigger than just one incident. The officers now had a choice to make, and the stakes couldn't have been higher. The officers reviewed the footage carefully, their faces becoming more serious with every second. The woman's accusations began to crumble under the weight of undeniable evidence. Marcus stood quietly, his composure steady despite the whirlwind around him. When the officers turned back to the woman, she suddenly grew defensive, her voice shaking. "You're all blowing this out of proportion," she snapped, crossing her arms. One of the officers calmly explained that based on the evidence, Marcus had done absolutely nothing wrong. The situation could have ended there, but then came the twist no one expected. One of Marcus's neighbors, an elderly man who rarely spoke up, stepped forward. He cleared his throat and said, "This isn't the first time she's called the cops on someone who doesn't fit her idea of acceptable. She's done it to me too. I have records to prove it." A hush fell over the crowd as the man shared his story of being targeted in a similar way. Others began nodding, recounting moments where they'd felt the woman's judgment or interference. The woman's face turned pale as the community she thought she could control united against her behavior. The officers took statements from the neighbors, noting a clear pattern of baseless complaints and harassment. As they wrapped up, they informed the woman that filing false police reports is a serious offense. The crowd watched as the once dominant figure now appeared small and vulnerable, retreating into her house without another word. Marcus, though vindicated, didn't leave the scene with anger. Instead, he thanked his neighbors for standing up for him and expressed hope that this incident would bring real change to the neighborhood. Just when it seemed the day was over, the young woman with the first video shared it online, where it quickly went viral. The unexpected twist: people from all over began sharing similar stories, sparking a wider conversation about standing against prejudice and holding people accountable for their actions. The barista looked down at the overflowing tip jar, her eyes welling up with gratitude. "You guys didn't have to do this," she said, her voice shaking slightly. One of the regulars chuckled and replied, "You handled that like a pro. We couldn't just let that go unnoticed." The crowd around the counter nodded in agreement, a sense of camaraderie filling the small coffee shop. Meanwhile, outside, Karen continued her dramatic pacing, her phone glued to her ear. Her exaggerated gestures and angry tone were hard to miss, drawing a few curious glances from passersby. But inside, the energy had completely shifted. The barista, buoyed by the support of her community, gave the next customer a warm smile and began taking their order as if nothing had happened. By the time Karen finally walked away in frustration, the coffee shop was back to its cozy, bustling rhythm. It was a moment that reminded everyone there of the power of kindness, resilience, and standing together in the face of negativity. As the tow truck drove off with Karen's car, the parking lot buzzed with a mix of disbelief and amusement. People who had been strangers just minutes before were now sharing knowing glances and quiet chuckles, united by the spectacle they had just witnessed. Some whispered about how her arrogance had backfired, while others shook their heads in disbelief at how far things had escalated. Karen, now without her car and holding a freshly issued citation, stood frozen for a moment, seemingly unsure of what to do next. Her confidence was gone, replaced by frustration and embarrassment. She glanced around, realizing the crowd's attention had shifted away from her, their phones still recording, but their focus now on sharing the story with friends. One man in the crowd muttered to his friend, "Karma doesn't mess around, does it?" as they both laughed and walked back to their cars. For the onlookers, it wasn't just about Karen. It was about seeing justice served in an unexpected yet oddly satisfying way. As Karen trudged away, her phone pressed to her ear again. She vanished into the distance, her angry voice growing fainter. Back in the parking lot, the community's mood was lighter, the day carrying on with a sense that, just this once, the rules had truly won. Here's a 150-word introduction for your YouTube video that's engaging, human-centric, and adheres to YouTube's policies. Asterisk, hey everyone. Welcome back to the channel where we dive into real-life stories that leave us shocked, inspired, and sometimes shaking our heads. Today, we're talking about a situation that's, unfortunately, all too common, but takes a surprising turn you won't see coming. Asterisk, picture this. A quiet neighborhood. A friendly black man just going about his day. And a neighbor whose prejudice takes center stage. Which he decides to call the cops on him for absolutely no reason. She probably thought it would all go her way. But little did she know, karma had other plans, and what happened next left her completely stunned. Asterisk, stick around to hear the full story of how this encounter unfolded, and the powerful lesson it teaches us about judgment, justice, and standing up for what's right. Trust me, you don't want to miss this one. Asterisk. Let me know if you'd like any tweaks. The story begins on an ordinary day in a quiet suburban neighborhood. It was the kind of place where everyone knew each other, or at least thought they did. Our main character, Marcus, was out enjoying the fresh air, walking his dog like he often did after work. He was friendly, polite, and always made a point to wave at neighbors as he passed by. But that day, something felt off. As Marcus strolled past a particular house, he noticed a woman standing by her window, peeking out from behind the curtains. She seemed tense, almost glaring at him as if he didn't belong there. Marcus brushed it off, thinking maybe she was just having a bad day. What he didn't know was that, moments later, the woman picked up her phone and called the police. Her complaint: a suspicious man was walking in her neighborhood. What happened next would shock everyone. Minutes later, Marcus noticed a police car slowly pulling up behind him. He felt a pang of confusion. He hadn't done anything wrong. Two officers stepped out, their expressions serious but professional. They approached him, asking for his name and what he was doing in the area. Marcus calmly explained that he lived just a few blocks away and was simply walking his dog. Meanwhile, the neighbor who made the call stood on her porch, arms crossed, watching the scene unfold. Her face was tight with suspicion, and she whispered something to another neighbor who had stepped outside to see what was going on. The tension in the air was unmistakable, and Marcus could feel the weight of being unfairly judged. As the officers continued their questioning, Marcus's neighbors started to gather, their curious eyes darting between him and the woman. What none of them realized was that someone nearby had captured the entire situation on camera, setting the stage for a turn of events no one could predict. As more neighbors gathered, murmurs began to ripple through the crowd. Some recognized Marcus and stepped forward, trying to vouch for him. "That's Marcus. He's lived here for years," one man said, gesturing toward the end of the street. But the woman who had called the police wasn't backing down. She insisted she'd seen him acting suspiciously and kept pointing at him, her voice sharp and accusing.